They told Caleb Mercer the marriage would prevent a war. Nobody bothered telling him the bride looked at him like she was deciding whether he deserved to breathe. The docking clamps slammed against the hull with a metallic groan that vibrated through the bones of the station, and Caleb felt the sound in his teeth. Cold recycled air hissed from the ceiling vents above the ceremonial chamber, carrying the sharp scent of ozone, polished steel, and something faintly floral he couldn't identify. Alien incense, maybe, or whatever passed for it aboard a warship the size of a small city. He adjusted the collar of the black diplomatic coat they'd forced onto him an hour earlier. The fabric was too stiff around the shoulders, the sleeves half an inch too long. Whoever tailored it clearly assumed all humans had the same body type. "Stand straight," muttered the Terran liaison beside him. "You're representing Earth." Caleb kept his eyes forward. "Funny, I thought I was being traded." The liaison didn't answer. Across the enormous chamber, rows of alien officers stood in complete silence beneath banners made from reflective silver fabric that shimmered like liquid mercury under the pale overhead lights. Every one of them wore dark armor with glowing amber lines running across the chest plates like veins beneath skin. None of them blinked much. Caleb hated that. It made the entire room feel less alive. Somewhere high above, engines rumbled through the ship's structure with the deep, steady pulse of a mechanical heartbeat. Through the massive viewing window behind the altar platform, stars drifted silently across black space, while Earth hung in the distance, blue and impossibly small. Caleb stared at it for a second too long. Home already looked far away. Then the chamber doors opened. The sound was soft, hydraulic, elegant. Every alien officer in the room lowered their heads instantly. She entered alone. Veolara Sorn moved through the chamber like someone walking underwater, slow and controlled, her long silver-white hair drifting against the dark fabric wrapped around her shoulders. The lights overhead reflected faint violet tones across her skin, almost metallic in places, while thin gold markings traced upward along her throat and disappeared beneath the collar of her formal uniform. Caleb had expected arrogance, maybe cruelty. The rumors around General Sorn's daughter had spread through every Terran station for years. Some called her a battlefield ghost. Others claimed she'd never spoken a kind word in her life. But standing there now, she didn't look cruel. She looked exhausted. Her amber eyes lifted toward him for the first time. Caleb felt the impact of that stare immediately. Not attraction, not fear, recognition, like she'd already measured him and found him lacking. Two armored attendants approached, carrying a silver case between them. The lid unfolded with a mechanical click, revealing two thin metallic bands resting inside dark velvet lining. Wedding restraints pretending to be jewelry. Caleb almost laughed. General Koresh Sorn rose from his elevated command seat, overlooking the ceremony floor. The alien general's broad frame cast a long shadow over everyone beneath him. "By decree of the sovereign fleet," he announced, his deep voice echoing through hidden speakers, "this union binds the Terran Alliance and the House of Sorn." Caleb glanced sideways at Veolara. She hadn't reacted at all. No smile, no pride, nothing, just stillness. The attendants offered the bands. Caleb picked his up carefully. The metal was colder than ice. Veolara extended her hand toward him without a word. Up close, he noticed faint silver scars circling her wrist beneath the sleeve of her uniform. Small, precise, deliberately hidden. His stomach tightened. Caleb slid the band gently onto her finger. Her skin was freezing cold. When she took his hand a moment later, her touch was steady enough to almost hide the tremor underneath. Almost. "Look at the cameras," whispered the liaison through clenched teeth. Caleb didn't. He kept watching Veolara instead, because for half a second, beneath all that silence and military perfection, the general's daughter looked terrified. The marriage ceremony ended without applause. The alien officers simply turned in perfect silence and filed out through the massive chamber doors while cold white lights reflected across the polished black floor like frozen water. Caleb stood alone near the altar platform for several seconds after everyone else had moved, still feeling the weight of the metallic wedding band against his hand. It felt heavier now somehow, less like jewelry, more like ownership. Human. The voice came from behind him, low and controlled. Caleb turned. General Koresh Sorn descended the elevated command stairs with slow, deliberate steps. the long dark cape behind his armor dragging softly across the metal floor. Up close, the alien general looked even larger than before, nearly 7 feet tall with broad shoulders wrapped in black military plating etched with glowing amber symbols Caleb could not read. His amber eyes settled on Caleb with clinical indifference. Not hatred. Worse. Assessment. You understand the purpose of this union, the general said. Caleb folded his arms carefully. Political stability. Public optics. Everybody smiles for the cameras while pretending this is not hostage trading. A faint mechanical hum filled the silence between them. The general's expression never changed. Earth requires protection. My fleet requires compliance. This arrangement provides both. Caleb almost laughed at the word arrangement. 6 months ago, he had been crawling through maintenance tunnels beneath a Terran orbital defense station outside Jupiter, trying to stop half the power grid from collapsing after a coolant cascade burned out 3 reactor arrays. Before that, he spent 4 years rebuilding damaged navigation systems for cargo ships nobody cared about. He was not a diplomat, not a soldier, not important enough to marry into an alien war dynasty. But then the treaty talks failed. Then several border colonies vanished from communication maps overnight. Then suddenly men in expensive uniforms started asking Caleb Mercer very careful questions about loyalty, stress tolerance, and psychological adaptability. You know what the funny part is? Caleb said quietly. I still do not know why you picked me. General Sorn stared at him for a long moment before answering. Because you repair broken systems without discarding them. Caleb frowned slightly. That is, your reason. It was my daughter's. The air seemed colder after those words. Caleb looked instinctively toward the corridor where Velara had disappeared earlier, silver hair vanishing into shadows without once looking back. She chose this. The general's gaze hardened just slightly. My daughter understands duty. That was not an answer. Caleb noticed it immediately. Somewhere deep within the ship, warning sirens pulsed once before fading into silence again. The station lights dimmed for half a second as another vessel docked nearby. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, exhausted already. Look, he muttered. I am not exactly thrilled about waking up married on a battleship either. You misunderstand your position, human. General Sorn stepped closer. The faint heat radiating from the alien armor smelled like burned metal and electricity. You were not brought here for happiness. You were brought here because my daughter requires a stabilizing influence. Caleb blinked. That sounds dangerously close to calling me emotional support equipment. For the first time, something shifted in the general's expression. Not amusement exactly. Recognition, maybe. You possess a reverence uncommon among your species under pressure, the general observed. Most humans who stand before me struggle to breathe. Caleb shrugged tiredly. I worked customer maintenance for 5 years. Nothing scares me anymore. Silence settled again. Then General Sorn extended a small black access card toward him. Your quarters are connected to my daughter's chambers. You will remain beside her at all official functions. Caleb accepted the card carefully. The metal surface felt warm from the general's hand. And if she does not want me there? The general's amber eyes narrowed slightly. Then you may be the first individual who has ever considered what she wants. The access corridor outside Velara's chambers was so quiet Caleb could hear the faint electric buzz inside the walls. Thin amber lights glowed beneath the floor panels, guiding him deeper into the military sector of the ship, while distant engine vibrations rolled through the metal beneath his boots like slow thunder. 2 alien guards stood outside the doorway without moving a muscle. Their black helmets reflected the corridor lights in smooth, curved lines, hiding whatever expressions they had underneath. Caleb held up the access card. One of the guards scanned it silently. The sealed door slid open with a whisper of compressed air. Warm air drifted out immediately, carrying the scent of heated metal and something softer underneath it. Cedar maybe, or whatever alien equivalent existed among the stars. Caleb stepped inside carefully. The room surprised him. He had expected luxury. Instead, it looked almost empty. A long viewing window stretched across one wall, exposing endless black space scattered with distant stars. Soft blue lights glowed along the ceiling edges while translucent fabric drifted gently from suspended rails overhead, moving with the ship's ventilation currents like underwater currents. The floor was polished silver-gray stone instead of metal, smooth beneath his boots. No decorations, no trophies, no photographs, nothing personal at all. It looked less like a home and more like a waiting room nobody planned to stay in very long. Veolyra stood near the massive window with her back turned toward him, silver hair falling halfway down her spine in pale waves that reflected the starlight behind her. Without the ceremonial uniform, she wore a dark fitted robe with faint gold stitching at the sleeves. Simpler, less armored somehow. Caleb noticed immediately that she had removed the wedding band. It rested untouched on the edge of a nearby table beside a glowing datapad. "You breathe too loudly," she said quietly without turning around. Caleb blinked once. "That feels unnecessarily personal. Your footsteps are heavier than the guards. I am human. Gravity was rough on us." Silence lingered between them for several seconds while distant stars drifted beyond the glass. Up close, the room hummed softly with climate systems maintaining a temperature slightly warmer than the corridors outside. Caleb loosened the collar of his coat. "Your father said these are connected quarters," he said finally. "Meaning I assume I am supposed to exist nearby for political reasons." Veolyra turned slowly then. The blue light from the stars washed across her violet skin, softening the sharpness in her features for half a second before her expression hardened again. "You are here because Earth fears my father. Fair. And because my father believes you will calm me." Caleb stared at her. "That is still the weirdest sentence anybody has ever said about me." Something flickered behind her eyes. Not quite amusement. More like confusion that she almost understood the joke. She walked toward the table and picked up the discarded wedding band between slender fingers before setting it back down again with obvious distaste. "Do not mistake this arrangement for affection, Caleb Mercer." Hearing his full name in her voice sent a strange feeling through him. "Too careful. Too precise. Trust me," Caleb replied, leaning lightly against the wall. "Forced interspecies marriage was not exactly on my 5-year career plan either." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "You speak casually for someone aboard a war flagship. I fix broken oxygen systems for a living. If I stop joking, I start panicking." That actually made her pause. Veolyra studied him carefully then, amber eyes tracing his face like she was searching for deception and not finding enough of it. Caleb noticed how tired she looked up close. Not physically, deep tired. The kind that settled behind somebody's eyes after carrying expectations too long. Then he noticed something else. Along the inside of her left wrist, barely visible beneath the loose sleeve of her robe, faint silver lines circled her skin in perfect geometric patterns. Mechanical, artificial, like something had once been attached there for a very long time. Veolyra immediately pulled the sleeve lower after noticing his stare. "Do not ask questions you are not prepared to hear answers to. Human," she said quietly. Caleb straightened slowly from the wall. "Funny thing is," he replied, "I think everybody on this ship stopped asking you questions a long time ago." The ship entered artificial night cycle 3 hours later. The overhead lights dimmed gradually throughout Veolyra's chambers until only the soft blue glow from the massive viewing window remained, washing silver reflections across the polished stone floor. Somewhere beyond the walls, engines thrummed with steady mechanical rhythm while distant intercom signals echoed faintly through ventilation shafts in a language Caleb still could not understand. He sat at the far end of the room near a low metal table, rolling up the sleeves of his formal coat while examining a half-disassembled climate control panel he had pulled from the wall 20 minutes earlier. "You are taking apart military property already?" Veolyra's voice came from the darkness near the window. Caleb did not look up. The airflow regulator was rattling. "I did not hear anything." "That is because you have probably lived with it too long." A small metallic click sounded beneath his fingers as he adjusted the internal filter alignment. The vibration immediately softened into near silence. Caleb leaned back slightly with satisfaction. "There. Better." Veolyra stared at him from across the dim room. Humans repair things compulsively. Only the things that sound expensive. For the first time since he had arrived aboard the warship, he caught the faintest hint of expression near the corner of her mouth. Not a smile exactly. More like her face had briefly forgotten how to remain guarded. Then it vanished. She moved away from the viewing window and crossed toward the far side of the room, where a suspended silver partition slowly unfolded from the ceiling at her approach, separating the chamber into 2 sleeping areas. Caleb blinked. That seems unnecessarily formal considering the political propaganda posters probably already think we are deeply in love. Veilira stopped beside the partition controls without looking at him. You are human. Last time I checked. And human males often misunderstand proximity. Caleb let out a tired breath and stood from the table, placing the repair tool aside carefully. Veilira. She stiffened slightly hearing her name spoken that way. Calm. Not fearful. Not diplomatic. Just direct. Caleb rested his hands loosely at his sides. I am not here to take anything from you. Silence settled heavily between them. The low blue starlight reflected faintly across the gold markings near her throat, while the ship vibrated softly beneath their feet. You should fear me more, she said quietly after several seconds. Caleb frowned a little. Why? Her amber eyes lifted toward him slowly. Because everyone else does. The answer stayed in the air longer than he expected. Caleb studied her carefully then. The rigid posture, the controlled breathing, the way she positioned herself closest to the exits without seeming aware of it. None of that looked like arrogance anymore. It looked practiced, defensive, like someone expecting danger even inside their own room. He glanced toward the untouched wedding band still resting on the table. Can I ask one question? Veilira's gaze narrowed cautiously. You will ask regardless. Fair. Caleb leaned lightly against the wall beside the repaired vent. Back during the ceremony, why did your hand shake? Her expression vanished instantly. Every trace of softness disappeared behind cold composure so quickly it almost hurt to watch. You imagined it. No, Veilira stepped closer then, silent against the stone floor until only a few feet separated them. Up close, Caleb could see faint silver lines beneath the skin near her temples pulsing softly with hidden light before fading again. Technology. Integrated somehow. Listen carefully, Caleb Mercer, she said in a low, steady voice. There are reasons this fleet obeys my father without question. There are reasons entire systems fear our name. You survive aboard this ship because they believe I allow it. Caleb held her gaze without moving. And do you? For one fragile second, something cracked behind her eyes. Not anger. Not cruelty. Pain. Raw and immediate before she buried it again beneath perfect control. Then Veilira reached past him toward the wall panel and dimmed the chamber lights completely. Darkness swallowed the room except for distant stars drifting silently through the massive window. Sleep on your side of the partition, human, she whispered into the dark. It is safer for both of us. Caleb woke to the sound of controlled breathing behind the partition wall. Not loud, not panicked, rhythmic at first, then uneven enough to pull him awake from shallow sleep. The chamber remained dark except for pale starlight spilling through the massive viewing window, turning the suspended silver fabric overhead into drifting shadows. For a moment, he stayed still on the narrow sleeping platform, listening. The warship around them hummed softly through the walls while distant engine vibrations rolled beneath the floor like an enormous sleeping animal. Then he heard it again. A faint metallic click followed by a sharp inhale of breath. Caleb sat up immediately. Veilira. No answer. Another click. This time closer. He swung his legs onto the cold stone floor and crossed the partition quietly. The blue starlight revealed her near the far wall beside one of the inactive display consoles. Veilira stood braced against the metal surface with one hand, while the other gripped her wrist tightly enough to make the pale, silver markings beneath her skin pulse faintly through the darkness. Sweat shimmered along her temples despite the cool room temperature. Caleb noticed the tremor running through her shoulders almost instantly. Hey, he said carefully, keeping his distance. You okay? Do not come closer. Her voice came strained and lower than before. Caleb stopped immediately. All right. Another metallic sound clicked beneath her skin. Caleb frowned. It sounded mechanical, like locking components shifting out of alignment somewhere inside the walls. Veilira shut her eyes tightly for a second as her breathing turned sharper. It will pass. That sentence usually means the opposite. She almost snapped something back, but another pulse of pain crossed her expression first. Caleb noticed then that the silver geometric lines around her wrist were glowing brighter now beneath the loose sleeve of her robe. Not decorative. Definitely not decorative. He glanced toward the nearby console. Small warning symbols flashed silently across the dark screen in alien text he could not read. Is that thing hurting you? He asked quietly. Veilira laughed once under her breath, bitter and exhausted. Very observant for a human. Caleb moved closer to the console instead of her. Can I help? No, you do realize humans fix problems as a coping mechanism. And you do realize this ship contains enough weapons to erase cities. That did not answer my question. She stared at him for several seconds, amber eyes reflecting the blue light from the stars beyond the window. Then slowly, reluctantly, she loosened her grip on her wrist. Caleb stepped closer carefully. Thin metallic bands circled the skin beneath her sleeve, integrated almost seamlessly into the flesh around her forearm. Tiny amber lights flickered along the surface like failing circuitry. Caleb felt his stomach tighten immediately. He recognized restraint hardware when he saw it. Military grade. Advanced. Built to monitor neural responses. That is not jewelry, he said quietly. Veolira's expression hardened from embarrassment into cold control again. No, Caleb crouched beside the console, studying the glowing indicators. Looks like the regulator alignment is off. You can read sovereign systems? Nope. But broken machinery all complains the same way. He extended his hand slowly toward her wrist, stopping before touching her. May I? Veolira hesitated. The hesitation itself surprised him more than anything else. Someone like her probably never asked permission. Finally, she gave the smallest nod imaginable. Caleb worked carefully, fingers steady as he examined the outer locking seam along the restraint band without forcing anything. The metal felt freezing cold against his fingertips. This thing is too tight, he muttered. The pressure calibration is wrong. It was designed that way. Caleb looked up sharply at her. Veolira immediately regretted saying it. He saw it in her face, saw the walls rising again, but he had already noticed too much. Who put this on you? He asked softly. Silence. Then another pulse flickered painfully beneath her skin. Caleb exhaled slowly and pulled a small utility tool from his pocket kit beside the bed platform. Hold still. Human, trust me for 30 seconds. The tiny tool hummed quietly as he adjusted the outer tension seal by less than a fraction of an inch. Barely anything. But the moment the pressure released slightly, Veolira's entire body stiffened with sudden relief. Before she could hide it, the glow beneath the restraint dimmed almost immediately. Silence filled the room again except for the distant engines. Caleb sat back on his heels and offered the tool a small shrug. There. Your terrifying warship husband has defeated another badly designed piece of hardware. Veolira stared at him like she had forgotten how. The next morning aboard the Sovereign flagship began with the sound of distant alarms rolling through the ventilation system like echoes underwater. Caleb opened his eyes to pale artificial sunlight filtering across the chamber ceiling while the ship's engines vibrated softly beneath the floor. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the silver partition, the endless stars beyond the massive viewing window, and the dark military coat hanging beside the door like a reminder chained to reality. He rubbed a hand across his face and sat up slowly. The air smelled faintly different this morning. Warmer, less sterile somehow. Then he noticed Veolira standing near the central console, wearing a fitted black uniform traced with thin amber lines along the sleeves. Her silver-white hair was partially braided back now, exposing the faint metallic patterns near her temples before they disappeared beneath pale skin again. She looked composed, perfectly controlled, but the tension around her shoulders had eased slightly since last night. Caleb noticed that immediately. Good morning, he muttered, voice rough from sleep. Veolira glanced toward him briefly. Your species becomes significantly less intimidating immediately after waking. That is fair. Caleb stretched carefully, joints cracking. You seem less murdery today, too. She blinked once. Murdery. Technical human term. For half a second, confusion flickered across her face before she looked away again. Caleb almost smiled. The restraint band around her wrist remained hidden beneath the uniform sleeve, but he noticed the subtle difference instantly. No trembling. No involuntary tension in her fingers. Whatever adjustment he made last night had helped more than she wanted to admit. The chamber doors slid open abruptly before either of them spoke again. 2 armored attendants entered in synchronized silence, carrying silver trays filled with unfamiliar food and glowing glass containers. They froze the moment they noticed Caleb awake beside Veolira. One attendant looked visibly alarmed. My apologies, Commander Veolira, the alien said carefully. We did not realize the human remained present. Caleb frowned. I am literally her husband." Neither attendant looked at him. Veolira's expression cooled instantly. "He remains," she said flatly. "Understood." Both attendants lowered their heads immediately. "Yes, Commander." Caleb watched the exchange carefully while the attendants placed breakfast across the low table near the viewing window. Nobody asked Veolira what she wanted. Nobody even looked directly at her while speaking. It felt less like service and more like protocol around a dangerous weapon. The moment the attendants left, silence settled across the room again. Caleb stared down at the trays. Most of the food looked vaguely edible except for one glowing purple liquid rotating slowly inside a glass container like moving ink. "I miss coffee already," he muttered. Veolira sat across from him slowly. "The dark liquid humans consume that smells like engine coolant. That is exactly the charm." She picked up one of the silver utensils with elegant precision. Caleb noticed her movements again. Controlled. Careful. Like every gesture had been trained into her over years. "Can I ask something?" he said. Veolira did not look up from her meal. "You ask many things. Why does everybody here act terrified of offending you?" That finally made her pause. The silver utensil stopped softly against the edge of the plate. "Because fear maintains order." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "That sounds like something your father says." Her amber eyes lifted slowly toward him. "You think you understand him already?" "No," Caleb shook his head once. "But I think I understand what happens to people forced to grow up around somebody like that." Silence spread between them while the engines hummed softly beyond the walls. Veolira stared at him for several seconds with an expression Caleb could not fully read. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she spoke. "There are no mirrors in these chambers." Caleb glanced around the room. She was right. Smooth metal walls, polished surfaces, dark reflective glass, but no mirrors anywhere. Why? Veolira looked down at the untouched wedding band still resting beside the table. "Because my father once told me it is dangerous for weapons to become self-aware." The words landed heavier than she intended. Caleb felt it immediately. The exhaustion beneath them. The loneliness. He looked at her quietly for a long moment before speaking. "Well," he said softly, "good thing I have spent my entire career fixing things people stopped treating like they mattered." The medical wing of the Sovereign flagship smelled like antiseptic metal and overheated circuitry. Thin white lights glowed beneath translucent floor panels, while silent drones drifted through the corridors carrying sealed containers filled with glowing blue liquid. Caleb followed half a step behind Veolira as armored personnel moved aside the instant they saw her approaching. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Nobody met her eyes for long. The entire wing seemed to tighten around her presence like prey sensing a storm. "You know," Caleb muttered quietly as they entered another corridor. "Back on Earth, this level of tension usually means somebody forgot to pay taxes." Veolira continued walking without slowing. "Your humor remains confusing. That is because human survival depends heavily on sarcasm." One of the nearby technicians nearly dropped a data pad, trying not to stare at them. Caleb noticed immediately. Veolira noticed too. Her shoulders stiffened slightly beneath the dark military coat she wore over her uniform. Every step she took looked perfectly controlled, but Caleb could feel the tension radiating off her now. The restraint beneath her sleeve probably was not helping either. They reached a sealed examination chamber at the end of the corridor. The doors opened automatically with a low hydraulic hiss. Cold air drifted outward, carrying the sterile smell of polished steel and ionized equipment. The room itself was circular, surrounded by glowing medical displays and suspended scanner arms hanging from the ceiling like silver bones. Caleb stopped near the entrance, while Veolira moved toward the central platform without hesitation. Too familiar, like someone reporting for maintenance instead of treatment. 3 alien medical officers stood waiting beside the platform. All of them lowered their heads immediately at her arrival. "Commander Veolira," one said carefully, "your neural synchronization levels require recalibration following the ceremonial bond integration." Caleb frowned. "That sounds extremely unhealthy." Nobody answered him. Veolira climbed onto the platform in silence while the suspended scanner arms rotated slowly around her body, projecting pale amber light across her skin. Tiny metallic patterns beneath her temples flickered faintly in response. Caleb watched carefully from across the room. The medical officer spoke about her like she was machinery, neural output, regulation compliance. Stabilization thresholds. Not once did anybody ask if she was comfortable. Hold on. Caleb interrupted finally. Does anybody in here actually talk to her like a person? The room went silent instantly. One of the officers looked genuinely horrified. Veolira's eyes snapped toward him sharply. Human, one medical officer said cautiously. The commander's condition requires precision. So does rebuilding a fusion reactor, Caleb replied. Still does not mean you stop treating the thing like it matters. Another scanner arm lowered toward Veolira's wrist restraint. The moment it connected, her breathing tightened almost invisibly. Caleb noticed immediately. He crossed the room before thinking too hard about it. Wait. The officers froze. Caleb crouched slightly beside the platform and examined the scanner interface. This calibration setting is too high. Impossible, one officer protested. These are sovereign-approved neural restraints. Congratulations. Caleb pointed toward the flickering amber indicator. They are still overheating her nervous system. Veolira stared down at him with visible disbelief. You can interpret sovereign medical diagnostics now. Nope. Caleb adjusted the scanner angle carefully. But I know what pain looks like when somebody spends years pretending they do not feel it. The room became dangerously quiet after that. Even the floating drones seemed to pause. Caleb lowered the scanner output slightly. Almost immediately, the rigid tension left Veolira's shoulders. Her breathing steadied. One of the medical officers looked stunned. Another seemed deeply uncomfortable. That reduction compromises command synchronization, the officer warned carefully. Caleb glanced up at him. And the old setting compromises her ability to exist without looking miserable. Veolira turned her head slowly toward him then. Up close beneath the harsh white medical lights, Caleb could see how exhausted she really was. Not weak. Never weak. Just worn down in ways nobody aboard this ship seemed willing to acknowledge. The scanner lights dimmed softly around her wrist. Silence settled across the chamber again. Then, quietly enough that only Caleb heard it, Veolira spoke. Do all humans repair things they fear? Caleb leaned lightly against the platform and offered the smallest shrug. Only the ones worth saving. By the time they left the medical wing, the Sovereign flagship had entered low orbit around one of the outer colonies near the disputed sectors. Caleb could see the planet through the massive observation corridor stretching alongside the command deck levels. Thick silver clouds rolled across dark oceans far below, while dozens of smaller military ships drifted through orbit like silent predators guarding the world beneath them. The corridor itself buzzed with controlled movement. Officers exchanged reports through glowing holographic displays while armored guards marched in synchronized formation beneath towering banners marked with the crest of House Sorn. Everywhere Caleb looked, people stepped aside the instant Veolira approached. Not respectfully, carefully, like civilians clearing a path for dangerous machinery. Your people really know how to make a hallway feel emotionally hostile, Caleb muttered under his breath. Veolira continued forward beside him with perfect posture. Fear creates efficiency. Fear also creates terrible family dinners. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly. Human. Humor again. Human survival mechanism. The closer they moved toward the command sectors, the quieter the surrounding personnel became. Caleb noticed something else too. Nobody ever touched Veolira accidentally. Nobody brushed against her shoulder in crowded corridors. Nobody even handed her datapads directly. Everything was placed down first for her to retrieve herself. Tiny details, tiny distances. But once Caleb noticed them, he could not stop seeing them everywhere. They reached a large viewing chamber overlooking one of the internal hangar bays, where fighter craft rested in organized rows beneath bright maintenance lights. Veolira stopped near the glass wall, while Caleb leaned lightly against the railing beside her. Massive cargo drones moved below them carrying weapon components across the hangar floor. The entire ship smelled faintly of fuel, overheated circuits, and recycled air. Can I ask you something without getting thrown out an airlock? Caleb asked quietly. Unlikely, Veolira replied. Your survival appears politically useful. Comforting. He folded his arms against the railing. Why does everybody here act like touching you would kill them? Silence lingered for a moment while silver ships drifted slowly beneath the observation glass below. Then Veolira answered without looking at him. Because in our society, command bloodlines are not viewed as individuals. Caleb frowned slightly. What does that mean? Her Her reflection stared back from the observation window, pale and distant against the stars beyond. High command daughters are raised to preserve military continuity. We are trained from infancy to obey strategic function above personal preference. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. That sounds suspiciously close to selective ownership. It is ownership. The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. Veolyra rested one hand lightly against the cold glass. Political pairings, genetic evaluations, public conduct protocols. Even this marriage was approved according to compatibility metrics before either of us were informed. Caleb stared at her. You are telling me nobody asked what you wanted? For the first time since meeting her, Veolyra actually looked confused by the question itself. Wanting is irrelevant. The answer hit harder than Caleb expected. Somewhere below them, warning sirens pulsed softly through the hangar as a cruiser detached from the docking rails. Orange engine light reflected upward across Veolyra's face while she watched the movement beneath them with detached calm. Caleb shook his head slowly. That is insane. It is order. No, he pushed away from the railing. Order is scheduling maintenance inspections. This is treating people like military property. Veolyra turned toward him then, amber eyes narrowing slightly. You speak as though humans are morally superior. Absolutely not. Caleb laughed once under his breath. Humans are disasters. But at least most of us understand marriage should involve two people making choices. Veolyra stared at him silently after that. The expression on her face shifted slowly into something more uncertain than cold. Like he had introduced an idea her mind did not fully know how to hold. You truly see this bond as optional, she said quietly. Caleb looked directly at her. I see you as a person. The words settled heavily between them while distant engine vibrations rolled through the observation chamber floor. For a second, Veolyra's carefully controlled composure faltered again, just slightly. Then footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them. An armored officer approached quickly before stopping several feet away and lowering his head. Commander Veolyra, he announced carefully. General Sorn requests your immediate presence in the War Council chamber. The officer hesitated before adding quietly. He specifically requested the human attend as well. Veolyra's expression hardened immediately, but Caleb noticed her fingers curl tightly against the railing before she let go. The War Council chamber sat deep inside the core of the Sovereign flagship, where the vibration of the engines felt stronger beneath the floor, low and constant like the pulse of some giant mechanical heart. Caleb followed Veolyra through 2 layers of security doors while armed guards stepped aside instantly at her approach. The air inside the chamber smelled faintly of heated circuitry and metallic dust. A massive holographic projection filled the center of the room, displaying rotating star systems covered in glowing tactical markers, while alien officers stood around the edges in complete silence. General Koresh Sorn remained elevated above them all on a black command platform overlooking the chamber. The amber lights woven through his armor reflected across the holographic map like burning lines beneath glass. Caleb immediately noticed something different about the room. Nobody looked relaxed around Veolyra here, not even slightly. The officers kept their distance instinctively, shoulders tense whenever she moved too close. Commander Veolyra, General Sorn said evenly as they approached. You are late. Medical recalibration required additional time. She answered without emotion. The general's gaze shifted toward Caleb next. And the human? Caleb folded his arms loosely, still deeply underqualified for whatever this meeting is. A few officers looked visibly uncomfortable at that response. General Sorn merely studied him in silence for several seconds before turning back toward the holographic display. 3 Terran transport vessels crossed restricted border space 6 hours ago, he announced. The Sovereign Council demands immediate response. The hologram shifted, revealing cargo ships drifting through deep space beside highlighted patrol routes. Caleb frowned slightly. Those are civilian transports. They violated military quarantine boundaries. Caleb stepped closer to the projection instinctively, because half those outer colonies rely on Terran shipments to survive. Several officers exchanged glances. Veolyra remained perfectly still beside him. General Sorn's expression never changed. Supply dependency creates strategic weakness. Starving people also creates strategic weakness. The room became painfully quiet after that. Caleb realized a second too late that everyone was staring at him now. Apparently, civilians did not casually argue with war generals aboard alien flagships. You speak boldly for someone unfamiliar with interstellar command, one officer said sharply from across the chamber. Caleb shrugged lightly. I spent years repairing life support systems on underfunded stations. Turns out oxygen shortages make people very honest about bad leadership. Silence again. Then unexpectedly, Veolyra spoke. The human is correct. Every officer in the chamber stiffened immediately. Caleb looked sideways at her in surprise. Veolyra stepped toward the holographic display slowly, silver hair catching the amber tactical light. Border pressure on civilian sectors has increased unrest probability by 40%, she continued calmly. Sustained shortages create instability across multiple colonies. One officer frowned. Compassion should not override strategic control. Veolyra's eyes hardened slightly. I did not mention compassion. Caleb noticed it then. Tiny shifts in the room. Tiny expressions. The officers were not afraid Veolyra would lose control. They were afraid she might think independently. General Sorn studied his daughter silently from the elevated platform, while amber tactical light reflected across both their faces. Father and daughter looked almost identical in certain angles. Same eyes, same cold posture. But Caleb saw the difference now. The general wore authority like armor. Veolyra wore hers like chains. You have changed your recommendations recently, General Sorn observed quietly. Veolyra's fingers tightened almost invisibly behind her back. Efficiency evolves through observation, or through influence. The words settled heavily into the chamber. Several officers glanced toward Caleb immediately. He felt the tension in Veolyra beside him before he even looked at her. Not anger, fear, small, hidden, immediate. Then the holographic map shifted suddenly again, displaying another classified file across the center of the chamber. Caleb froze the instant he recognized the image. Human prisoners. Terran civilians held inside sovereign detention sectors. His stomach tightened hard. What the hell is this? He asked quietly. One officer answered coldly. Unauthorized colonial trespassers awaiting processing. Caleb stared at the exhausted faces inside the hologram. Workers. Mechanics. Families. Not soldiers. These are civilians. They entered restricted territory. Caleb looked toward Veolyra sharply. And what happens to them? Silence spread across the room. No one answered immediately. Then slowly, Veolyra stepped closer to the hologram. Amber eyes fixed on the detained humans displayed in pale light. Her voice came quieter this time. Almost tired. Normally, she said carefully, they disappear into labor sectors. Caleb turned toward her fully. Normally. For the first time since entering the chamber, Veolyra looked directly at him instead of the room around them. And in that moment, Caleb realized something impossible. She already knew every one of those prisoners by name. The War Council chamber emptied slowly after the meeting adjourned, but the tension remained behind like smoke trapped inside metal walls. Officers gathered their holographic tablets in silence, while tactical projections faded one by one into darkness. Caleb stayed near the center platform watching the final image of the detained Terran civilians disappear from the air. He still could not shake the look on Veolyra's face when she admitted she knew them. Not strategically, personally. You should not have challenged the council publicly, Veolyra said quietly beside him once the chamber had nearly emptied. Caleb glanced toward her. I was not aware basic human decency counted as rebellion here. Her amber eyes shifted briefly toward the elevated command platform, where General Sorn remained motionless above them. You underestimate how closely this fleet watches weakness. Caleb let out a breath through his nose. Funny thing is, where I come from, refusing to treat civilians like cargo is usually considered the opposite of weakness. Veolyra looked away first. That surprised him more than the argument itself. The chamber lights dimmed automatically into lower power mode, while the distant hum of the ship's engines deepened beneath the floor. General Sorn finally descended from the command platform with slow measured steps. Every remaining officer lowered their heads instantly before exiting through the side corridors, leaving only Caleb, Veolyra, and the general alone inside the massive chamber. Caleb suddenly understood why the room felt colder now. Commander Veolyra, General Sorn said evenly, wait outside. Veolyra stiffened slightly. Father, outside. The single word landed with quiet finality. Caleb noticed the tiny tension in her jaw before she obeyed without another argument. The chamber door sealed shut behind her with a heavy metallic thud. Silence followed immediately. General Sorn approached Caleb slowly while tactical lights flickered faintly across the black armor covering his massive frame. "You influence her," the general observed. Caleb folded his arms carefully. "That seems to concern everybody more than the war. War is predictable." The general stopped directly across from him. "People are not." Caleb stared back evenly despite the pressure radiating from the older alien. Up close, the general's presence felt overwhelming. Not loud, controlled, like standing beside a reactor core hidden behind steel walls. "Your daughter is not what they think she is," Caleb said finally. The amber lights along the general's armor pulsed once. "No," he replied quietly. "She is far worse." Caleb frowned. "I do not buy that." General Sorn studied him silently for several seconds before turning toward the massive observation window overlooking the stars. "When Veolira was 6 years old," he said at last, "our enemies breached the eastern defense sectors of our homeworld." Caleb remained silent. The general's voice never changed. "Thousands died because commanders hesitated emotionally instead of strategically." His reflection stared coldly back from the glass. "After that failure, our government initiated the Sovereign Inheritance Program." Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach already. What kind of program? Neural military integration. The answer came without shame. Children born into command bloodlines were modified to synchronize directly with fleet systems. Faster calculations, higher tactical efficiency, reduced emotional interference. Caleb stared at him in disbelief. "You turned children into military processors. We ensured survival. You erased their childhoods." The general's eyes shifted toward him sharply then. "Human morality is a luxury species developed during peacetime." Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, humanity is what keeps people from becoming machines during wartime." For the first time, something almost like irritation crossed the general's face. "You misunderstand my daughter completely. Veolira was not designed for peace. She was engineered for command." Caleb thought about the restraint around her wrist, the hidden pain, the missing mirrors, the way every officer stepped away from her like she carried something dangerous beneath her skin. Then another realization hit him all at once. "The restraint is not controlling aggression," he said quietly. "It is controlling the implants." General Sorn said nothing. That silence confirmed everything. Caleb looked toward the sealed chamber doors where Veolira waited outside alone. "She is in pain all the time, is she not?" Again, silence. Then finally the general spoke. "The synchronization process becomes unstable under emotional conflict." Caleb's jaw tightened hard. "So every time she starts feeling human, your systems punish her for it." The chamber grew deathly still. General Sorn's voice lowered almost imperceptibly. "That is why your presence aboard this ship is becoming dangerous." Caleb found Veolira waiting alone outside the War Council chamber beside the observation corridor overlooking deep space. The silver glow from distant stars reflected across the polished floor, while ships drifted silently beyond the massive windows like dark islands suspended in black water. She stood perfectly still with her hands clasped behind her back, but Caleb noticed the faint pulse of silver light beneath the skin near her temples the moment he approached. The implants were active again. "You heard everything, did not you?" he asked quietly. Veolira did not answer immediately. The corridor around them remained empty except for the low mechanical hum of the flagship breathing through hidden vents. Finally she spoke. "The walls aboard this vessel are designed to carry command frequencies." Caleb leaned lightly against the railing beside her. "That feels deeply unhealthy architecturally." No response. He glanced sideways at her. "Hey." Slowly her amber eyes shifted toward him. Exhaustion sat behind them now, without the usual armor hiding it. "You should not have argued with him," she said softly. "Your father turned you into a military operating system when you were 6 years old. I think arguing was the polite response." Her expression tightened faintly. "You still do not understand. Then explain it to me." Veolira looked back toward the stars beyond the observation glass. A small transport vessel drifted below them, escorted by sovereign fighters, tiny engine trails glowing blue against the darkness. The synchronization implants were created to merge command bloodlines directly with fleet tactical systems. she said quietly. Every ship aboard this armada can connect to my neural network during combat. Caleb felt cold settle through his chest. That is not command. That is forced integration. It is survival. At the cost of what? Silence again. Then finally Veolyra lifted her sleeve slowly. The restraint around her wrist glimmered beneath the corridor lights. Thin silver bands embedded partially beneath her skin. Tiny amber lights pulsed rhythmically along the surface like a second heartbeat. When emotional responses increase beyond acceptable parameters, she explained carefully, the implants destabilize. Caleb stared at the restraint. Meaning the fleet systems begin responding to my nervous system directly. Caleb looked up sharply. You are telling me your emotions can affect military operations? Veolyra nodded once. Several years ago during a border conflict, one of the synchronization channels overloaded after I experienced panic during a civilian evacuation. Her voice remained calm, but Caleb noticed the slight tremor underneath now. 3 defense cruisers lost navigation lock simultaneously. Caleb swallowed hard. People got hurt. Yes. The answer barely sounded human. Afterward, my father authorized permanent restraint regulation. Caleb suddenly understood everything. The fear, the distance, the way officers treated her like a dangerous reactor waiting to fail. Not because she was cruel, because nobody trusted her to feel anything safely. That is not your fault, he said immediately. Veolyra actually flinched slightly at the words, like her brain did not know what to do with them. You do not understand, she whispered. Every emotional attachment increases synchronization instability. Caleb stared at her for a long moment beneath the cold corridor lights. Then slowly he shook his head. No, what I do not understand is how your entire civilization looked at a child in pain and decided the problem was the child instead of the system hurting her. Veolyra's breathing caught slightly. Tiny, almost invisible. But he noticed. Caleb, you are not dangerous because you feel things. His voice softened. You are dangerous to people who built their entire society around pretending emotions are weakness. The corridor fell silent except for the distant vibration of engines through the walls. Veolyra looked at him, then with something close to fear in her eyes again, but different now. Not fear of him, fear of believing him. You need to stop saying things like that, she said quietly. Caleb frowned. Why? Her amber eyes lowered toward the restraint around her wrist where the amber lights had begun flickering faster beneath her skin. Because the implants respond when I want to believe you. Before Caleb could answer, warning alarms suddenly flashed red across the corridor ceiling. A sharp automated voice echoed through the flagship. Priority command synchronization requested. Commander Veolyra Sorn report immediately to tactical control. Veolyra closed her eyes for half a second, like someone bracing for impact. Then the restraint around her wrist lit up bright enough to illuminate the corridor in amber light. Red emergency lights pulsed across the corridor ceiling as the flagship shifted into combat readiness mode. The low mechanical hum beneath the floor deepened into a heavy vibration that rolled through Caleb's chest like distant thunder, while warning signals echoed across every deck. Personnel rushed through nearby corridors carrying tactical displays and command tablets, but everyone still moved carefully around Veolyra, as though the glowing restraint around her wrist had become a loaded weapon in plain sight. Caleb stayed beside her anyway. The amber light beneath her skin flickered harder now, spreading faint, glowing lines upward along her forearm beneath the sleeve of her uniform. Veolyra, he said quietly, look at me. Her breathing had turned uneven again. Not panic. Worse, restraint. Like somebody trying to hold a collapsing wall upright through sheer willpower. You should leave, she whispered without looking at him. Yeah, not happening. The corridor screens flashed with incoming tactical alerts while automated voices repeated synchronization requests across the ship. Caleb finally grabbed her wrist carefully before she could pull away. The restraint felt hot now beneath his fingers. Too hot. These implants are overloading you, he muttered. Release my hand. Not until you stop looking like you are about to pass out standing up. Her amber eyes lifted toward him sharply then, and for the first time since meeting her, Caleb saw genuine fear without any walls hiding it. If synchronization destabilizes during tactical integration, she said carefully, the fleet's systems can cascade. Then maybe your fleet should stop plugging warships into a person's nervous system. Another pulse of light flashed beneath her skin hard enough to illuminate the corridor walls around them. Several nearby officers immediately backed away further. Caleb noticed that too. Nobody stepped forward to help her. Nobody even tried. They were afraid of her suffering. The realization made something inside him snap into anger. "This is insane," he said under his breath. "Caleb." No, he stepped closer instead. "You do not get to apologize for being treated like equipment." Veolira's composure finally cracked completely then. Tiny, brief, but real. "You do not understand what happens if I lose control," she whispered. Caleb held her gaze steadily. "Then let somebody help you hold it together for once." The words hit her harder than the alarms screaming around them. Caleb saw it immediately in the way her expression shifted with sudden confusion and pain all at once. Like nobody had ever offered support without demanding obedience in return. Then the flagship lurched violently beneath them. Not an attack. A synchronization surge. Corridor lights flickered. Several nearby displays exploded into static before stabilizing again. Veolira staggered slightly as the restraint around her wrist burned bright amber. Caleb caught her instinctively before she hit the wall. Somewhere across the ship, warning sirens escalated into full emergency tone. "Commander synchronization instability detected," the automated system announced coldly. "Fleet tactical channels compromised." Officers froze in the corridor. Fear spread instantly. Caleb looked down at the restraint around her wrist, mind racing. Then suddenly he understood something. The regulation band was not only suppressing her emotions. It was feeding the overload back into the synchronization network. The restraint is amplifying the feedback loop, he realized aloud. Veolira's eyes widened slightly. "Impossible." "No." Caleb crouched quickly beside the wall maintenance panel nearest them and ripped it open with his bare hands. Internal wiring glowed blue beneath the panel. "It is using your nervous system like a relay amplifier. Human engineering should not understand sovereign systems. Bad design is universal." Caleb worked fast, fingers moving instinctively through the wiring while the ship continued trembling around them. Sweat rolled down his neck under the flashing red corridor lights. "If I break the external synchronization channel," he muttered, "the fleet loses direct neural access temporarily." Veolira stared at him in disbelief. "That would disable tactical command integration across the entire flagship." Caleb glanced up at her sharply. "Good." Before anybody could stop him, he yanked two glowing conduits free from the wall panel and slammed them directly against the restraint interface around her wrist. Sparks flashed bright blue. The restraint emitted a sharp metallic crack before the amber lights abruptly died. Silence hit instantly. Across the corridor, every warning screen flickered dark. The violent vibration beneath the floor stopped. Veolira gasped softly and nearly collapsed forward before Caleb steadied her against him. For the first time since he met her, the silver glow beneath. Her skin disappeared completely. The corridor around them remained frozen in stunned silence. Then slowly, Veolira lifted her head toward him with wide amber eyes. "You disconnected me," she whispered. Caleb looked back at her quietly while dead tactical screens reflected across the corridor walls. "No," he said softly. "I think I finally gave you back to yourself." The Sovereign flagship drifted in complete silence for the first time in decades. No synchronization hum echoed through the corridors anymore. No tactical pulse vibrated beneath the floors. Across every deck, emergency crews scrambled to restore disconnected systems, while command officers argued in frightened whispers behind sealed doors. But inside Veolira's chambers, there was only stillness. Caleb sat on the cold stone floor beside the massive viewing window with a repair kit spread around him and half the wall panel dismantled beside his knee. Tiny wires and glowing circuit pieces rested in organized rows, while soft starlight poured across the room in pale silver waves. Behind him, Veolira stood motionless near the center of the chamber, as though she still did not fully trust her own body without the fleet connected to it. The restraint remained dark around her wrist now. Lifeless. Quiet. Caleb tightened one final connector inside the wall panel before leaning back with a tired sigh. "There," he muttered. "Your climate system officially works better than military command infrastructure." Veolira stared at him for several seconds. Then slowly, almost cautiously, she crossed the room toward the viewing window. Her movements looked different now. less controlled, less rehearsed. For the first time since he met her, she moved like somebody choosing where to step instead of following invisible programming. Outside the glass, stars drifted silently across endless black space, while distant colonies glowed like scattered embers against the darkness. "The council is demanding your arrest," she said quietly. Caleb snorted softly. Honestly, that feels emotionally predictable at this point. A faint breath escaped her then. Small, barely audible, but real. Caleb looked up immediately. Was that a laugh? Veolyra looked genuinely confused by the question. "I do not know." The answer hit him harder than he expected. Not because it sounded tragic, because she meant it honestly. She had spent so many years suppressing herself that simple things no longer felt recognizable. Caleb lowered his gaze briefly toward the dead restraint around her wrist. "How long has it been?" he asked softly. "Since the implant stopped." Veolyra turned slowly toward the stars beyond the glass again. "I do not remember silence before this." The room fell quiet after that except for the faint hum of repaired ventilation systems drifting through the walls. Then the chamber doors opened. General Koresh Sorn entered alone. No guards. No officers. The old general stepped into the room beneath the pale starlight, looking somehow older now, without command systems surrounding him. His amber eyes settled immediately on the inactive restraint around his daughter's wrist. Silence stretched heavily between all three of them. Caleb stood slowly from the floor. General Sorn studied him for a long moment before speaking. "The fleet tactical network remains unstable." Caleb folded his arms loosely. Maybe connecting warships directly into children was not the galaxy's greatest engineering decision. The general ignored the comment. His attention remained fixed on Veolyra. "Your synchronization channels can still be restored," he said quietly. Veolyra did not answer immediately. The silver light from the stars reflected softly across her violet skin while the dead restraint rested motionless against her wrist. Then finally she spoke. No, the word was calm. Certain. Human. General Sorn's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Without integration, you relinquish command authority. Then someone else may command. You were created for this purpose." Veolyra looked at her father fully then. Caleb saw it immediately. Not hatred. Not fear anymore either. Just exhaustion finally learning how to stand upright. "No," she said softly. "I was born. What you created came afterward." The silence that followed felt enormous. General Sorn stared at his daughter like he no longer recognized the person standing before him. Maybe for the first time in years, he truly did not. Then slowly, the old general lowered his head once. Not as commander, as father. Without another word, he turned and left the chamber. The doors sealed shut behind him with a soft metallic whisper. Caleb let out a long breath beside the viewing window. "Well," he muttered. That felt emotionally historic. Veolyra stepped closer beside him until they stood shoulder to shoulder facing the stars. No military titles. No command systems. No synchronized warships listening through her heartbeat. Just silence. Real silence. She looked toward the endless black beyond the glass for a long time before finally speaking. "Caleb." "Yeah." Her amber eyes reflected distant starlight as she turned toward him slowly. "Stay." Caleb looked at her quietly for a moment while the stars drifted endlessly outside. Then he smiled faintly and rested one hand beside hers against the cold glass. "Only because you finally asked as yourself."